If you have ever watched a Formula 1 race, you may have noticed these. They usually pop up after an incident, some even stating what penalty will be imposed on the driver in question. But what exactly are those penalties, and when does each one apply? Let's find out. In Formula 1, as in any motorsport, it is common to see things like dangerous maneuvers, on-track incidents, and improper behavior. To condemn these sorts of behaviors, stewards can impose penalties on the drivers involved, and depending on the severity of the offense, tougher penalties are issued. According to the Formula 1 sporting regulations, there are 5 different types of penalties listed in order of severity. A reprimand or a warning for minor offenses like cutting corners or pushing drivers out of track. A time penalty for bigger offenses like speeding in the pit lane or illegal overtaking. A drop in grid places, generally given for unscheduled engine or gearbox changes. We will come back to this later. Disqualification from the event for major offenses like causing an accident. And finally, suspension from the next race for big-time offenses like driving with an out-of-norm car. The first 3 are the most common ones, as they are given out at almost every race. So let's go a little bit more in depth with those. A reprimand or a warning consists of a written statement regarding the offense. Should a driver ignore the warning and repeat the offense, a tougher penalty will be imposed. And so on. The penalty you most commonly see at the bottom of your screen is the time penalty. There are 4 types of time penalties, and it goes as follows. For the 5-second time penalty, the driver must enter the pit lane, stop in his pit box for at least 5 seconds without anybody working on the car, and then carrying on with the pit stop and on with the race. Very similar to the 5-second time penalty, the only difference being the wait of 10 seconds instead of 5. Yeah. Drive-through is when the driver must enter the pit lane and then rejoin the race without ever stopping. Worst of time penalties, where the driver must enter the pit lane, stop in his pit box for at least 10 seconds and then rejoin the race without carrying on an actual pit stop. It is also important to note that if any of the 4 penalties are imposed after the driver's last pit stop, during the last 3 laps of the race, or after the end of the race, then time will be added to the driver's final race time. 5 seconds for the 5-second time penalty, 10 seconds for the 10-second time penalty, 20 seconds for the drive-through penalty, and 30 seconds for the 10-second stop-and-go penalty. In addition to driving penalties, stewards can also issue penalties for technical infringements. These generally come in the form of grid penalties. For those of you that are always confused with these types of penalties that often just come out of nowhere, like why is this happening? Here's why. First off, these penalties are given for exceeding power unit replacements. There are 6 different elements that makes up the power unit. The 6 elements are the turbocharger, the internal combustion engine, the energy store, the motor generator unit, kinetic, the motor generator unit, heat, and control electronics. Each driver is only allowed to change each power unit element 4 times during a single season. Should a driver use a 5th of any of the elements, a 10-place grid penalty will be imposed. A 5-place grid penalty will then be imposed for the first time a 5th of any of the remaining elements is used. Likewise, the first time a 6th of any of the elements is used, a 10-place grid penalty will be imposed, and so on. On top of that, Every unscheduled gearbox change will require a driver to drop 5 places on the grid. This type of penalty is cumulative. So for instance, if you change out 3 elements of the power unit a 5th time, you would get a 10 place grid penalty for the first element, a 5 place grid penalty for the second, and another 5 for the third one. In this case, you would end up with a 20 place grid penalty, which is actually not that uncommon because Formula 1 components are not designed to last very long. They are designed for performance. All of these penalties may seem like a pain in the butt that just take away some of the enjoyment from the sport, but in reality, they are there to push drivers and constructors alike to compete fairly. So, at the end of the day, penalties are there to serve a purpose, the purpose of enforcing the rules, as they do in any other sport. They encourage fair play and competition, which in the end is truly beneficial for everyone. That is all I have for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to share and subscribe. Until next time, these were just Racer Thoughts.